it happens something like that in the mouth. It takes a while so that all the muscles and the neuromotor things to get ready to speak. And all of a sudden you may it's a confusion between what is normal and it was not normal. I had a client, a little girl that had 1 month, one year, 9 months. It was learning to speak and already stuttering. So it is important that we understand this process because it has to be done a very good differential diagnosis. And because we know that usually children may recover or get out of stuttering if you treat it as soon as possible, but the chances that we do not wait are not good. So if let's wait, no, let's not wait. Why should we wait until 2 years, as we've seen here in Latin America? It's usually the people say, oh, just wait 2 years, it'll pass. No, it will not pass. It'll be bad. If it is stuttering, probably it will not pass. Dr. Yaruss will talk about in a minute about recovery. And yes, we do have recovery to talk about. But would you bet in any child that, well, let's wait and see what happens? As a professional that understands the subject, I do not wait, and I say to them, please do not. Go look for help. Look for somebody that understands. And it's important because not all pediatricians know what stuttering is. Not all health professionals know what stuttering is. And unfortunately, a lot of speech pathologists also do not know what stuttering is. So go to a specialist and they will tell you that it's not good to wait. So yeah, the goal is to prevent chronicity. So the sooner, the better. Okay. And the next question is, which is a good explanation to those that say that I learned to stutter imitating my friend? Well, there is no good explanation because if we imitating stuttering would learn stuttering, we that work with stuttering people, we would be stuttering all the time. So this is not true. There is no imitation. We can imitate, but it doesn't mean that you'll become a person who stutters. So it's important that this is something that doesn't have any publication on. There is no research about that. There's nothing that can say, well, imitation is good and I will learn. I learned to stutter because I was imitating. Probably you began to stutter because you have a family member that does this, or maybe you had a problem at birth, or maybe you had too many infections that were not treated correctly, as we are now learning about Dr. Perron's latest publication. And imitation certainly is not a factor. Dr. Yaruss, now you have quite a lot of questions here.
Oh my, all right.
What are we supposed to call people who stutter? Is it okay to use the word stutterer? Is it okay to use stutter at all? Or I thought we were supposed just to use the word fluency.
Yeah, now we have had a lot of discussion in our field over the years about the appropriate thing, the appropriate word to use when we're talking about people who stutter. Here in the United States, the standard is to use person-first language in stuttering. So according to ASHA, we're supposed to say person who stutters. And if you're like me, you always do everything ASHA tells you to do. However, we know from the research from Ken St. Louis that many people who stutter refer to themselves as stutterer and are completely fine with that terminology. In fact, it turns out to be a very individualized thing. We're learning more and more from the neurodiversity movement, especially starting in the world of autism, that autistic individuals, many, not all, prefer to be called autistic as opposed to people with autism. And in fact, there's a Facebook group, a neurodiversity Facebook group, where they are very strict about not allowing any posts that use person first language. They want to use identity language. So indeed, we have some change in this. This is one of those pendulum things where once upon a time it was always stutterer. Then for a while it was person who stutters. And now that pendulum is moving again. Here's what I do. My simple rule of thumb is that I follow the lead of the person that I'm working with. I tend to default myself. I start off with person who stutters and I default to person first language. Although when I hear them refer to themselves as stutterer, I'll ask them if that's what they prefer. And it shouldn't be on me to decide what they prefer to be called. So I use their preference. I have a pet peeve about this, though, and some of you have heard me spout off on this before, so bear with me just a minute. But I personally can't stand the abbreviations that we use: PWS, AWS, CWS. I understand where they came from, okay? I understand that, all right, people were trying to use person-first language, but it's cumbersome to always say people who stutter. My dissertation just a couple of years ago was on children who stutter who also exhibit disordered phonology, and that's a mouthful. But that's how I got my dissertation up to 200 pages. Is I got to say that phrase over and over again. So I understand the desire to use the abbreviations. I totally get that. But if the point of an abbreviation is to shorten things, person who stutters is 5 syllables and PWS is also 5 syllables. It doesn't save anything at all. And when you say I have 5 CWSs on my caseload, kids who stutter, children who stutter, kiddos who stutter, people who stutter is how I prefer it. I'm just not a fan of the initials, because if the whole point of person first language is to not dehumanize someone, well, how much more have we dehumanized them to convert them to just a string of letters? That's my pet peeve on that. I know I'm in the minority on that, but I always spell it out. That said, I don't mind SLP for speech language pathologist. I'm not consistent, sue me. So just some food for thought there. The bigger question, though, is whether or not we can use the word stutter. And indeed, for a very long time, there was a taboo in our field against using the word stutter. I hope that we've left that behind, but I still do to this day hear people saying, I have 4 disfluent kids on my caseload. And I think, what a remarkably small caseload you must have, because everyone is disfluent. We want to differentiate between the typical behaviors that everyone exhibits and the behaviors that are maybe not necessarily unique to people who stutter, although that's a question for another discussion, but those behaviors that are the interesting aspect of the experience of living with stuttering. And I would say that sensation of being stuck, of being able to not being able to move forward. Another one of the papers that Seth Tishner and I released last December in JSLHR showed that adults who stutter report that moment of stuttering, it feels to them like a loss of control, like a moment of being stuck. The most common word that was cited in this qualitative analysis that overall involved 420 adults who stutter was the word unable to continue. And I believe that aspect is unique to people who stutter. I'm working right now on a new severity measure that is designed to capture that unique aspect of stuttering, that stuckness. And boy, that might just be a nice thing to call that moment. Call it the stuck, although I know that's not terribly professional. So those are some of my pet peeves.
Well, it could also be a philosophical thing, right?
Very much.
When you say a person who stutters, you put a person first. And then, a person that has qualities, has difficulties, and everything that everybody else has. And sometimes a mouth that doesn't work as properly as most mouths. So it is a very difficult question in terms of what to use, when to use, and where, and how the science evolves on this. Because depending on where you are, and people who stutter call themselves stutterer. That's okay with me too. So I agree with you. We follow the lead of the client. Okay. So what about the word fluency? Do you want to say something about that?
Sure. I have many friends in the community who refer, if you'll forgive me, to the word fluency as the other F word. That word puts a lot of pressure on people, and it calls up, for some people, a lot of historical trauma of always having this ideal to which they are supposed to can't think of the word that I want, aspire, even though that may not be a realistic ideal or a realistic goal for them. Again, it's another part of one of my pet peeves when I see in a research article talking about children who stutter and their fluent peers, as if it's a dichotomy. People who stutter are always and only stutter, and people who are not stuttering are always and only fluent. And I don't prefer that terminology myself. It's fine to talk about the word fluency as long as we define what we mean by that. But I would really hesitate to set up this dichotomy between people who stutter and fluent people. Everybody is fluent sometimes. Everybody is disfluent sometimes. People who stutter are fluent sometimes. People who stutter experience the stuck sometimes, for lack of a better term. But I don't think that we as speech language pathologists should be going to all sorts of lengths to dance around that S word. Some of you know the quote from Albus Dumbledore: always use the proper name for things. Fear of a name increases fear of the thing itself. And so I talk to my clients and my kids about stuttering, even the little ones, because I know a lot of people, they prefer, bumpy speech or sticky speech. But keep in mind that any one of those other terms that we might use for that feeling of being stuck is by definition metaphorical, which means that we have to assume that the young child can understand that when I mean bumpy in this metaphorical sense, it's an analogy. It's not exactly what the child is experiencing. So I talk openly with my kids about when they feel stuck, when they feel like they can't move forward, when they know what they want to say but can't say it. And then I help them learn that the commonly accepted term for that experience is stuttering. There's no reason to sugarcoat it, and there's no reason to ascribe it more power than it actually needs. And Charlie, my dog, agrees. You probably heard him woof. So back over to you, Anelise. I'm sorry, I'm going on and on.
No, just please keep going. So the other question that people really ask a lot is that how young is too young to evaluate a young child who stutters? And as I said before, I do not wait. And here at the IBF, we try to, stick to this idea that the sooner the better. I don't think that it's too young. It's never too young to begin to understand what is going on. We have to, have time to orient the parents, to explain things to the family, to help the family deal with the situation. So the sooner, the better. And I know that a skilled speech pathologist or an informed pediatricians will do a differential diagnosis so that we have the idea that is necessary to do in each case. But I understand that stuttering is a chronic condition, whatever the term in English would be better, because I have to deal with 3 languages sometimes. So if stuttering is a chronic condition and it has a chance of not becoming a chronic condition, and this is going to happen at very young age. So I think that the younger, the better. I don't know if you agree with me, Dr. Yaruss.
The decision process that I go through for the young children is a risk analysis. Does the child exhibit factors that, based on research, seem to be connected to a greater likelihood of continuing to stutter? And if there is risk, then you bet I want to take action. And we have some great research coming out of the labs at Vanderbilt, at Purdue, here at MSU, and several others. I don't want to miss naming someone. And a nice paper by Kara Singer and the team from her work that she did when she was at Vanderbilt on some of those risk factors. Another real nice paper by Bridget Walsh here at MSU and her colleagues showing that, there's certain things that indicate that there's a greater likelihood for persistent stuttering. And if the child, I see Barbara Bound here. So the work that you've done, if there's an indicator that the child is at risk, I want to treat them and I want to treat them early. There's no point in waiting. If there is less risk, and this happens sometimes, children go through a period of stuttering and they don't have family history and they don't have concomitant speech and language problem, then I am more comfortable watching very closely for a period of time, not a long period of time by any means. But if there's concern on the part of the parents, concern on the part of the child, then I want to help them through that period, even if I believe that the risk might be lower. So in general, pardon me, I tend to be more liberal with recommending therapy, as I tend to be in most things.
Thank you. Well, the next question is about recovering. As I said before, we've heard that young children often recover from stuttering, and we know that's true, but we have to know how to do this. So will you please talk about that?
Oh, you bet. Thanks. So this is along the lines of the issue that we were just talking about, this risk analysis. There's a ton of great research going on. And again, I would miss mentioning some of the labs. This is a tremendously important question for us, is to get more understanding of which young children will persist, which young children might go through a period of stuttering and then grow through that. We don't yet know for certain if those children start out the same and then change over time, or if those children are different from the very beginning. One of the really fascinating studies that's just starting up, Bridget Walsh in my department here at MSU is starting up a 5-year NIH-funded grant looking at stuttering development in a longitudinal fashion, which many others have done. Okay, that's great. But looking also at the development of adverse impact in these children and looking at what life experiences may differentiate the children who persist and the children who recover. So she's not just looking at language skills and motor skills and temperament and all these other factors that the research has identified as being potentially important, but also life experience. My long-held belief in the absence of any evidence until we get this research done is that it's not just where you start, but what happens to you along the way that makes the difference about whether your path will ultimately be one of continued stuttering or recovered stuttering. So we don't actually know for certain how to do true differential diagnosis between persistence and recovery, but we are learning more and more all the time. A challenge, though, is the longer a child continues to stutter, the less likely the child is to recover. So when we look at the literature, we do see recovery in older school-age children. Pete Howell from University College London has written about children who recover in those pre-teen years, in particular between the years of 8 to 12, he's written about extensively. But the likelihood of recovery is diminishing. And for that reason, I always feel personally a bit of a time pressure when I'm looking at a child who stutters, and especially as they're getting older, 4, 5, 6, 7, I know that likelihood of recovery is diminishing rapidly. It's not like they cross a threshold, like, happy birthday, you're going to stutter for the rest of your life. But somewhere in that 6, 7, 8 range, things are changing. And if I can get a kid into therapy sooner than that, I will be much more comfortable than if it's later than that. That's not to say that we can't help people make tremendous changes in their communication and in their life after they're older than that, in the school age years. Just because we don't have a way of curing stuttering doesn't mean that there isn't a lot that we can do to help, because indeed there is. But the nature of the stuttering therapy changes, in my opinion, the longer a person stutters and the more at risk they are for that persistence. What about you, Anelise? What do you say?
Well, I agree with you. And also we have all the work that Dr. Shang has been doing that shows the differences in the brain that children who recover and who do not recover, they have. So it's not just environment, it's not just emotional, it's in the brain. Stuttering is in the brain. So we've got to understand that. So what we do not know is when and if they will recover, when they will recover. So I do not wait, because I don't know if this is going to be one of those cases, especially if it's a boy. Usually what the research has been telling us that girls have a little bit more chance of recovering than boys. We have a proportion of 4 or 5 men to 1 woman. So I don't know when they will and which will recover, but I do not wait, and I will interfere and will intervene, if you will, especially if it's very young. And at school age, you are right. The longer the child is stuttering, the less is the possibility of spontaneous recovery. And yes, we do have a lot of tools and things to do to get lives better, especially those very young. I think that I don't know if you do have any statistic specifically the chances that the school age children will recover. I don't think we do have that, do we?
I think Pete's got some numbers in his book, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. There's a bunch of experts on the line, though. Maybe one of you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat if you happen to know.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so could we move on?
Please, please. And there's great dialogue going on in the chat as well. I'm sorry, Anelise. There's a great dialogue. I'm trying to keep up with the dialogue in the chat. Keep that going. It's great fun.
Yeah. Do it. Go on. If you want to air that for us, that'll be nice.
Oh, you just brought up one of my favorite questions.
Well, yes. You see, all the questions are between quotation marks. So it's because it's not our questions. These are the questions that we have been, receiving along the years all the time, especially nowadays. I've heard that such and such therapy approach is the best. Which is the best?
Yeah. Boy, if only stuttering were that simple. But
yeah.
Nothing really is that simple. No aspect of human life is that simple. But I understand the desire to make it simpler because it is a confusing condition, both for those of us who work with people who stutter and for people who stutter to live with. But in this age of internet and social media influencers having an outsized voice in what people learn about stuttering and stuttering therapy, I do fear that we run into a situation where people can proselytize and say, this approach is best, or I always do this with my clients. And I have a grave concern about that because that is simply not consistent with the principles of evidence-based practice. People will say XYZ approach has the best evidence, so you should use it. And there are influencers right now who say exactly that as they oversimplify the stuttering condition. But I try to push back on that every chance I get. When I see on Facebook, for example, somebody posts a question about a 3-year-old who stutters, and a dozen people come on and say, use this program. This program's the best. This program's got the most evidence. And we have to point out that that's an oversimplification, and it is absolutely unethical, in my opinion, for people to recommend a therapy approach without knowing something about the client. People will recommend different name-branded approaches because they say it's the best without even asking things like the client's age sometimes, or male or female, or what's their experience been, or tell me about the family. What are the risk factors? So I really push back hard on that, as hard as I can, to help us recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all to stuttering therapy. There is no one-size-fits-all to any condition. The analogy I think of is like this. Let's say you hear about a child who's 4 years old and he's got a speech sound disorder. Well, who among us in speech sounds would say, oh, use cycles. Oh, use minimal pairs. Oh, do that. No, we don't know. Tell me more about the child, and then I'll formulate some hypotheses about which approaches might be most appropriate. And I'll try them while collecting data so that I can target my therapy to the individual child's needs. So as you can probably tell, it's another pet peeve. In case you run into this, though, I've written several blog posts for stuttering therapy resources, specifically on the topic of understanding and selecting a therapy approach for young children who stutter. That may be of use. I often refer clinicians to them. One of them, for example, is called "Child is Stuttering? Try this one weird trick," just like all the ads that you see on the internet, because that's kind of what some of our colleagues are doing. Oh, do this, it'll fix the problem, without first taking a step back and asking, well, who is the child, and who are the family members, and what can I do to tailor my treatment to their needs? There is no one best treatment for stuttering, just as there is no one best treatment for truly anything. And I think that as a clinicians, we can do better. I see some comments. There are indeed evidence-based treatment, and there are indeed studies that we can draw from. That is true. But I guarantee you that no matter what, there is never going to be a study that is specifically about the client that you're sitting across from. There are always unique aspects of our clients. So it's still upon us to abstract from the available evidence and apply it to the individual. And when we say, oh yeah, just use that name branded approach, that's when we run into trouble. We say, I can start with that approach and then adapt it to the needs of this particular client. That's better. But boy, there's some loud influencers on social media who are saying, always use XYZ with kids who stutter, and it's an oversimplification, I fear.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, because we as speech pathologists, we have the goal to do the best for our clients, and one size doesn't fit all. You just said that, and this is a very important difference between programs and therapeutic process and therapeutic programs, because we have to see the client first and the program after. I have heard things, well, I just use the XYZ program and my client doesn't fit into the program, which is just absurd. So it's not the client that has to fit the program. It has to be something, the other way around. So we have to know all the programs and all the process and how to evaluate and how to know to learn and write specific goals for that specific client. Otherwise, the chances that it's not going to work very well are high. And this is one of the problems that we've seen. People have, parents and people who stutter, especially adults who stutter, they think, well, speech therapy doesn't work. I'm not going to be cured anyway. So this is not exactly cure is a word that we have to discuss already, because what is exactly a cure? And I agree with you, there is no best approach unless what is best for that specific person. So I think so, at least. Well, the next question is, somebody told me that the more I stutter, the less I hold back, and vice versa. And why is that so? This is a very interesting question. I know that, scholars in stuttering have been talking about this for a long time. And I think that awareness of stuttering is the foundation of any stuttering therapy. The person who stutters, now I'm going to use the word, needs to respond to moments of stuttering with awareness and acceptance, and not with fear or hiding or not escaping from it. And this is why. Why? Because it helps to understand what is happening, reduces fear, avoidance, and escape behaviors. It helps to sharply reduce all the actions that induce to more stuttering. So every time you substitute a word, for instance, or you give up talking, you might enhance in your brains the same behaviors, because we know that the brain learns by repetition. So the more I fear stuttering, the more I will fear stuttering. This is already published. And so we know that if the brain learns by repetition, it's a very tricky way, the goal, we have to come with, if you have a lot of negative feelings, every time you have them, it's a chemical thing. Memory is done and produced by chemical things in the brain. So you just save a memory, let's say, based on the chemicals that produce that memory. And this is impact the brain, and this will impact the emotional part of the person. that fears stuttering while it is stuttering. So it is interesting to understand that if we treat the child as soon as the child begins to stutter, the brain probably will not become as skillful in storing memories that are hard, because this is definitely a chemical process that is based on negative experiences. So if you hold back, if you do not hold back, the better it will become. So talk freely about stuttering. Stutter freely. It doesn't mean that you don't want to get better, though. I might accept myself as a person who stutters, but on the other hand, I also want to do better, because the world is not as understanding as I would like to be. So I don't know if you have to say something about that too.
I just want to offer one thing on this, an interesting finding from one of the other studies that Seth Tishner and I published last year in JSLHR. Again, a survey of over 500 adults who stutter in this case. And we found that people who take as their goal when speaking to be fluent actually experienced greater adverse impact in their lives than people who take as their goal when speaking, communicating, speaking freely, and allowing stuttering to happen. In other words, the more people try to not stutter, the more problems they have in their lives. We're not talking here about fluency. I'm not talking about if they're more fluent or less fluent, but adverse impact is measured by the OASIS was higher in people who are trying to be fluent. To me, this is a huge, huge red flag warning for our field that if we're pushing people too much toward fluency, that might actually be increasing the problems that they experience in their lives. This is not to say that there isn't any place for fluency. Please don't overread into that. But we do want to be careful about the messages that we send and that we have sent traditionally as a field. There's a reason that so many people who stutter react strongly negatively to the F word. This may be part of it, is that constant seeking for something that they can't consistently attain sets people up for failure. And we actually have some interesting data on that now.
Good, thank you. Is it a fact that voluntary stuttering is just faking stuttering? How is this helpful? Treatment, like, in terms of treatment?
I love this question too, because indeed, one of the things that we often do in stuttering therapy is help people learn to stutter differently. Maybe learning to stutter with less tension and struggle, less avoidance, stuttering in an easier way. And voluntary stuttering, fake stuttering, pseudo stuttering, voluntary disfluency, it has a whole bunch of different names, is one way of helping people learn to do that, helping them learn to be able to feel less bad in that moment, to tolerate that moment of stuttering. We can talk about stuttering all day long, but what we really want to do is help people change their reaction to that moment. If we accept the premise that stuttering involves some kind of moment of loss of control or some type of stuck feeling, some type of sensation of not being able to move forward, we can acknowledge that that is probably a pretty uncomfortable place to be. I've had my clients liken this to that moment when you're going to jump off a high dive board and it's a little higher than you were really wanting it to be, and you're looking over the edge and you want to go, but you're afraid to go. Or that moment on the roller coaster when you're going up, 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 and then there's just right there, and it's like, oh. Well, that moment's not a pleasant place to be. And if we can help people tolerate being in that moment and experiencing that, if we can help people explore the responses of listeners, which can be quite negative, but can also be quite neutral, if we can help people learn to feel the physical sensations and respond to the physical sensations in an easier way, well, then this can help to reduce the burden of stuttering in their lives. And voluntary stuttering, pseudo stuttering, fake stuttering is an excellent tool for being able to do that. It's very hard for some people at first because of their relationship with stuttering. But if we go step by step, and we're starting to get more and more data on this, this is one of the things. Karen Herring, one of my doc students, was going to be doing her dissertation on this. COVID's gotten in the way a little bit, so we're making some alternate plans for her dissertation. But we need more study on exactly what changes people experience as they go through a desensitization hierarchy. That's a concept that's been around for generations and decades, but we need more data on what are those changes. As clinicians, though, we can see that that makes it easier for people to tolerate, to be in, to change the moment of stuttering, ultimately to stutter like an expert, to stutter well, if you will, to stutter like a rock star, as some would say, and in doing so, reduce the burden that they're experiencing.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it is hard. Well, stuttering is, there is a discussion, you just talked in the beginning, who you are. I mean, the identity of being a person who stutters, and why do I have to learn how to stutter if I already do stutter, you know? So this is something that has been going on, but we know as clinicians that if we do this correctly, it'll get very nice results in terms of easing the burden. And I agree. I think it's helpful, yes. The other question is, I've read that the child just needs to practice more and eventually the strategies will become habitual. If he practices a number of hours per day, he should be able to overcome the stuttering.
Boy, do we hear this one a lot. And our field has historically believed that if you could only get people who stutter to practice enough, then eventually their brain would change and the fluency would take over. And we simply don't have evidence to support that notion. We know that practice makes things easier, no doubt about that. We know that practice increases automaticity. Great, no doubt about that. We know that practice changes the brain, and even relatively quickly. All the juggling literature, no doubt about that. But whether practice like that completely and permanently rewires a person's brain, we don't have evidence for that. And right now, that is really getting under my skin because there is, again, an internet influencer who is telling people just have to repeat this practice X tens of thousands of times. That's what it takes. Just do it X tens of thousands of times. And then they'll be like me and they won't stutter anymore. And I think that is such a potentially harmful message. Not only because it sends people the message that they're not good enough, that they didn't try hard enough, that it's their fault that they continued to stutter, but it's just an easy scapegoat for the clinician to say, hey, not my fault. It's not that my technique didn't work. It's that you didn't work hard enough. And unscrupulous clinicians have said that for generations. So I really react strong. This is like the Scott Yaruss pet peeve show today. That's just what we're doing. This is how, this is me at home. So thank you all for putting up with that. But yeah, I read this one a lot these days, and I fear because it causes even well-meaning clinicians, because we do know that practice helps. If you want to get better at something, you got to practice. But it causes even well-meaning clinicians to put a burden on their clients and parents. Yes, excellent point, Anita. And well-meaning parents who want nothing but the best for their children. And it seems so intuitive, though, like, all right, when I was learning to drive, initially I had to think about driving and it took all my attention, but now I drive automatically. But that's an oversimplification, right? And so although practice helps, we need to be very careful about the messages that we send and recognizing that although we can make things easier, we will not rewire the person's brain to the point where they are a non-stuttering brain. It's like I could practice writing with my right hand my entire life. I would still at brain, be a lefty. I get better at writing with my right hand, but I'd still be a lefty. I don't know. Anelise, your turn.
Well, in English, you just have the verb to be. In Portuguese, we do have the verb to be and something that is not exactly to be, but it means that you are a person who stutters, but you may not be stuttering if you take care of something, or if you have more acceptance, or if you have if you embrace your vulnerability and you think, well, yeah, I stutter, and so what? Uh, but I haven't, the only thing that I see every day with very, very young children is that if they are given good models and good orientation and everything, they might get out of it. And this is good, because as a parent, I would love to my child to be fluent in the F word, as you say. And there is not, well, Dr. Barry Guitar has a word that an expression that is very interesting. He said, we there do not stutter. We are conscious fluent people, because now I'm speaking in English, which is not my native language. I have to be very aware of everything that I say, not only in terms of content, but also in terms of form. And I know everybody is listening, and this is a problem because it's, kind of scary sometimes. But I don't think that just practicing 10,000 hours, they say that you need 10,000 hours to do to get better at things. Well, I don't know. I just know that if you practice, you get better. But that doesn't mean that you will overcome stuttering. It means that you'll get better at stuttering, or feeling better with yourself and your stuttering. Does it make sense to you? Okay, so let's move on. Is it fair to say that stuttering is a disorder that is still avoided by some speech and language pathologists? Yes, I think that it's fair to say. This is a subject that is very dear to me, because I was reading a paper now that just came out in 2020, and that was based on the ideas that Cooper and Cooper had said the first time in 1975. And then after in 1996. And yeah, so in 96, they had a fluency disorders, journal of fluency disorders paper, the clinician's attitude towards stuttering. And they measured between, 2 decades and then 2 decades forward. When I had a student once, and we did the same investigation that Cooper and Cooper did, we tried to reproduce here in Brazilian people. And we found results very, very similar to those. But 96, it was 2002 or 3. And then what happens is that now, as you can see in this paper that comes from Vanderbilt University, which has a very intriguing title, is what I think really what I think. And so they decided to measure the implicit and the explicit attitudes towards stuttering among practicing speech and language pathologists. And they found that you can see here the figures are very. There is no question about it. The speech pathologists do prefer to work for. They have a preference for fluent speech as opposed to not fluent speech or stuttery speech. And I invite you to read this because it's interesting. And I hear the estimated marginal means of explicit rating because it's implicit and explicit. And you can also see that they are different for people who do not stutter in terms of people who do stutter. And this is interesting because, we have to think about that. The results as we are speech pathologists that are in you and I. We are so derived to understand what goes on and what can we do better for our clients. And I believe that knowledge is better than just information. I believe that we have to qualify speech pathologists because they know they have a lot of information, but not necessarily really deep knowledge about what to do and how to do and when to do it and in what basis they have the theoretical basis, the practical basis, and science-based ideas to do that. So Scott and I are going to do a talk in the Spanish track on Saturday about exactly this, the abilities and the skills and the competencies that are good to develop if you are a speech clinician that wants to work with people who stutter, even though there are people who stutter who decide, I don't want to do speech therapy because it doesn't work. Well, yeah, well, let's say they have encountered or had experiences that didn't work. But finally, but we are fortunate to have experiences that do work. So this is nice. And I'd rather say, what about those that want to be better? That what about those little children? And we are talking here about school-age children. What do we do with them? They have a whole life ahead of them. Should we just, do not something about? So our job is to qualify and make speech pathologists migrate to our field so that they can be better and have more success treating their clients. Dr. Yaruss just had a course here with the speech pathologists in Brazil. It was a huge success because people didn't have much of those ideas. And we have to improve that. And we are constantly trying to do that. So if you have a better clinician, you will have better results with your clients. This is, it looks easier. It's not that easy, but it's better if we do have the good knowledge. Information is not exactly knowledge, okay? So we are, Dr. Yaruss, why don't speech pathologists, language pathologists like to treat people who stutter?
Well, they should. It's an extraordinarily rewarding area of practice if we think about this from the clinician's perspective for a moment. Yes. Most of my work is trying to understand the speaker's perspective. But if we take a moment and get selfish about this, think of it as the clinician's perspective. I have learned so much from my clients and formed such bonds and relationships with them that I truly can't understand. But I know the reasons. I know there's a lot of reasons that so many clinicians aren't comfortable with stuttering. In fact, one of my master's students a couple of years ago did a study on that of Central Michigan SLPs, people in our region or geographic region. Why don't you like working with stuttering? And there are a variety of answers that were given: lack of training, lack of experience with the individual, being disappointed that there was no simple cure, uncertainty about their skills, lots of that. I hold the belief, though, that every speech language pathologist can become a superb stuttering clinician. That's the belief that drives me every day. I know some people who might take more work than others. I would take more work to be good in other areas than other people might, but I really have faith that everybody can learn to interact with people on a human level, listen before you talk, learn. I know that's funny for me to say, listen, when I'm doing so much talking today, but form those relationships, focus on that therapeutic alliance. We're learning more and more about the ingredients that make for successful therapy, and those ingredients are pleasant not only for the client but also for the clinician. I've done over the years a whole lot of workshops and trainings with speech language pathologists, over 600, trying to help people who clinic, speech language pathologists, help them come to recognize that they don't have to be afraid of stuttering. So much of the work that Nina and I do with Stuttering Therapy Resources is focused on that exact mission. The reason that I answer all those posts on Facebook, even when I'm tired at night, is because I want people to know that they don't have to be afraid of stuttering, and that when they're focused on the right goals, when they're focused on understanding their speaker's needs, their client's needs, that they can make a difference. And from a clinician's perspective, that's really, really nice. But we do have work to do to help many clinicians understand that and come to terms with that.
You know that here in Brazil, the schools that have undergrad courses in speech pathology, they just more than 60% of those in the whole country have stuttering as a content in their, training. They do not have practical clinic, clinical practicum. They do not, sometimes they've heard about something stuttering, and don't worry about that because this is just an emotional thing. Send the client to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and that's okay. So we've been avoiding a lot and trying to do better with our clients. But to do better with our clients, we have to do better with ourselves. So if we are clinicians that understand that it's a potential, I love the area because we have to work with everything, not just, exercises for your tongue, or not just exercises for, you just do everything. We need to hear, you need to use the oral motor abilities. We have to learning and speech and everything. It's an integration of everything. And you have to know and be knowledgeable about everything, which is wonderful because we never stop studying and we never stop, searching for better answers. And this makes the field better. And I understand that people, SLP, as you say, don't like treating, but we have to change that idea, I think. For those who stuttered that want to get better, not all of them. There are certain people, there's certain branch in the people, the community, so that, well, they have, I want to stutter because this is my way of being. So, and I welcome that. I think you have to be stuttering all the time you want and be happy about it. But some people are not as happy about it. So we are here to help them improve the quality of life. This is a goal that is important to us. And we are getting to the end. I don't know how we are on time. Are we getting closer, right, to our end?
We have 4 minutes. That's not very many.
Okay. I heard that Joe Biden used to stutter. Why doesn't he stutter now? Well, he is. I think he probably embraced his vulnerability and made it not, not a measure of weakness, but a definition of courage, maybe. He has been doing speeches about that, when he was still a candidate. And he interacted with that little teenager that was, worldwide, seeing Joe Biden taught me to do like that. And so he probably has gone through a process of becoming open to a reciprocity that helps build his confidence. And it certainly didn't, it didn't prevent him to become a president-elect, even though the other guy doesn't say so. But this is fortunately not our problem at this moment, right? So, and for you, the last question is, why can't my client be as fluent as Joe Biden? Well, up to you.
Yeah, I just want to amplify a comment that Chaya made on the chat there. Yes, indeed. Joe Biden spoke at the NSA conference years and years ago, back when he was just a lowly senator. It was really quite a moving experience. I was on the board back then for the NSA, and he was scheduled to come in, talk for 10 minutes. His handlers had said that's all the time he had. And he stayed for a couple of hours talking to people, sharing his experiences. One of the most frustrating aspects of observing the politics in the US in the last few weeks is seeing even speech language pathologists saying, oh, I don't think he stutters. I think it's blah, 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 whatever. But his stuttering's clearly documented. He's talked about it for years. It's well known. So that's one thing. Just makes me, yes, Joe Biden stutters, and he still does. He just manages to cover it up. He talked about it very openly and has many times. But this question now gets into pet peeve number 992. It's the whole famous people who stutter thing, when the famous people don't actually stutter all that much. This is a really sore point for many of my friends in the stuttering community, that so many of these famous people who are held up as models for others to follow don't really show a whole lot of stuttering in their speech. This is one of the reasons why so many people were excited about George Springer, the Houston Astros player, who actually stuttered as a famous person who stuttered. But so many of them are ostensibly fluent. And so often the media narrative is so-and-so overcame stuttering. And I really don't like the message that sends, because it's not fair to hold one person up to another person's standard. There are things that I can do that some of the people on the line here can't do. And there are things that all of you on the line here can do that I can't do. When we compare ourselves to others, we only set ourselves up for disappointment. And I fear that constant focus on so-and-so didn't let stuttering hold him back, don't let it do that to you. And furthermore, the famous people are remarkable people in the first place. I mean, there's only one person who is Winston Churchill, and I don't stutter and I can't be like Winston Churchill. I mean, that's just really a very high bar to set. What has always moved me much, much more than that is the not so famous people who stutter. The teachers and the doctors and the veterinarians and the taxi drivers and the engineers and the software designers and the just people who stutter. And those people are far more accessible through self-help organizations such as the NSA. Here in the US, we have NSA, Friends, Say. There are great opportunities to connect people, and I connect every child and every family that I work with support organizations in some fashion so that they can meet and actually get to know people like them who stutter. Rather than holding up this very difficult and indeed disheartening model as if you just try harder, you can do it too.
Okay, I will stop sharing here because now we can see everybody. I wasn't able to. So we are finishing. Well, we just answered a few of the questions, and we had a huge amount of questions to answer and talk about facts and myths. And we appreciate very much your audience here with us, your presence here with us. I apologize for not being very early in the room because of some technical reasons. And Dr. Yaruss, your final words.
It's so great to see everybody. We're just going to have to save up all the hugs that we owe one another for next year's ASHA, with any luck. But yeah, this is not what we would normally be doing this Thursday morning. We would normally be nursing a hangover this Thursday morning at ASHA. That's inappropriate. But great to see you. Thank you for joining for this session. So many of you could have run this session instead of listening to this session. There's so many experts on the line here. We've learned so much from all of you, and we're grateful for the partnership. The other reason that clinicians should really like stuttering is because of the community of speech-language pathologists who work with people who stutter. It really is a wonderful group, and I miss all of you, and I'm grateful that you're my friends.
Yeah, and I would like to thank for all the people around the world, the ex-students of ours from Latin America and people that are here just to watch us. And I agree with you, there are thousands of people that could be talking with us or without us on this subject. But thank you so much, people, for being here. And thank you for the NSA for, organizing this global research conference, which is, has been fun and it's just begun. So we have 3 more, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days to go. So keep joining us. You'll love it. I know. Thank you.
And for those of you who speak Spanish, join us on Saturday morning. We'll be doing this in Spanish, not me.
Yeah, por favor, estén con nosotros sábado porque tenemos mucho más cosas para hablar. ¿Eh? Hasta sábado.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tam.
You got it.